There are experts on television, and then there are people who genuinely know things. People whose knowledge runs so deep that even seasoned professionals stop and listen when they speak. Rebecca Romney was the second kind. She didn't stumble onto the set of porn stars chasing fame or paycheck. She arrived already respected, already trusted, and already quietly legendary in a world most people don't even know exists. The rare and antiquarian book trade. But somewhere between her first appearance on national television and her sudden, unexplained disappearance from the show, something shifted. Questions started circling. Rumors spread across forums and comment sections. Fans who had watched her authenticate Civil War documents and expose million-dollar forgeries were suddenly asking, where did she go, and why won't anyone say? To understand Rebecca Romney, you have to understand that her story is not really a television story at all. It's a story about intelligence, obsession, patience, and an entire world hidden inside old books. A world where a single page can be worth more than most people earn in a decade, and where one wrong call can destroy a reputation built over years. Television gave her a platform, but the platform was never the point. Rebecca Romney was always something far more interesting than a TV personality. And the truth about who she really is, what she really accomplished, and what actually happened during those mysterious years is far stranger and more fascinating than any episode of Porn Stars ever managed to capture. Rebecca Romney was born on April 6, 1985, in Phoenix, Arizona. Nothing about her early life suggested she would one day become one of the most respected rare book dealers in the United States. She wasn't raised in a house full of antiques. Her family wasn't connected to the auction world. By her own admission, she once found old books tedious, relics that belonged behind dusty glass cases rather than in the hands of someone young and curious. Her real passions ran toward philosophy, language, and the kind of deep intellectual inquiry that doesn't fit neatly into any career path. She wanted to understand how people thought, how civilizations constructed meaning, and how ideas traveled across centuries. That curiosity took her to Brigham Young University, where she enrolled in 2003 and spent the next 4 years studying philosophy and classical studies. While her peers were gravitating toward more commercially practical degrees, Rebecca was spending 4 seminars debating free will and teaching herself ancient Greek on the side. By the time she graduated in 2007, with honors and a perfect GPA, she had developed working fluency in 5.5 languages: English, French, Japanese, Latin, Ancient Greek, and some Old English. She wasn't just learning vocabulary. She was learning how to think across time, how to read a document not just for what it said, but for when it said it, who wrote it, and what the world looked like when the ink was still fresh. That skill set, which seemed almost comically impractical to casual observers, turned out to be precisely what the rare book world required. Authenticating a manuscript from 1623 is not just a matter of checking a database. It requires understanding paper production methods, ink chemistry, printing techniques, binding styles, and the particular handwriting conventions of a given era. It requires knowing enough about history to recognize when something doesn't add up, when the language is slightly too modern, when the paper aged in a way that doesn't match the claimed date, when a signature shows characteristics that only emerged decades after the supposed signing. Rebecca's classical training gave her exactly that kind of multi-layered perception. Her entry into the rare book trade was, by her own account, almost accidental. In 2007, shortly after graduation, she applied for what she believed was a general management position at Bowman Rare Books in Philadelphia. She had misread the job listing. When she arrived for the interview and realized the role was for a rare book specialist, a field she had never formally studied, she came close to walking out. Instead, she stayed, was honest about her lack of direct experience, and was hired anyway. The interviewers recognized something that transcended a resume. Within months, she was handling items that most people only encounter in museum display cases: a Shakespeare First Folio from 1623, leaf from a Gutenberg Bible, a first edition of Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica. The learning curve was nearly vertical, and she climbed it. By 2010, Rebecca had been promoted to gallery manager at Bowman's Las Vegas location. She was 26 years old. The rare book world in Las Vegas was small, not the kind of city most people associate with centuries-old manuscripts. But it existed, and it connected in unexpected ways to the broader world of high-value collectibles that the city attracted. Rick Harrison had been running the gold and silver pawn shop since 1989, and by 2010, Pawn Stars was already a hit television show built on the premise that extraordinary objects could walk through an ordinary door at any moment. The show relied heavily on outside experts, people who could look at an unusual item and tell a story about it with authority and clarity. Rick Harrison didn't find Rebecca Romney through a casting agency or talent search. They moved in overlapping circles. The rare book and antiques world in Las Vegas was intimate enough that professionals crossed paths regularly at events, through shared contacts, and through the kind of informal networks that develop when a small community of specialists occupies the same city. When items involving paper, books, documents, letters, historical manuscripts came into the pawn shop, Rick needed someone who genuinely understood them. Not someone who could perform expertise for the camera, but someone whose knowledge was real enough to hold up to scrutiny. He called Rebecca directly. Her first appearance on Pawn Stars came in Season 4, on April 4, 2011. She was handed a collection of Civil War-era papers that included what appeared to be a Confederate bond from 1861 with an estimated value of $5,000 if authentic. Rebecca examined the paper texture, the ink distribution, the printing method, and the handwriting. Within 10 minutes, she had identified a forged signature that dropped the item's value from $10,000 to a few hundred. She delivered this verdict calmly, precisely, and without any of the theatrical flourishes that television often encourages. Viewers noticed immediately. The ratings for that episode climbed by 15%. Fan forums lit up. People who had never thought twice about old documents were suddenly fascinated. What made Rebecca compelling on camera was exactly what made her effective off it. She never performed excitement she didn't feel. She never raised her voice for effect. When she delivered devastating news that a seller's prized possession was a forgery, or that an item they believed was worth a fortune had been misidentified, she did so with a composure that communicated genuine respect for the person on the receiving end. She was not cold. She was careful. And in a television landscape saturated with manufactured drama and exaggerated reactions, her quiet precision was quietly riveting. Between 2011 and 2015, Rebecca Romney appeared in roughly 30 episodes of Pawn Stars, and in nearly every one she delivered assessments that required a depth of knowledge that the show's format could only partially convey. Some of those appraisals became touchstones for the show's most dedicated viewers. There was the episode involving a first edition of Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, one of perhaps 1,250 copies printed on November 24, 1859, a book that sold out on its very first day of publication and went on to reshape the relationship between science and religion in ways that are still reverberating today. Rebecca identified the authentic green cloth binding, the correct diagrams, and the period-accurate advertisements dated to June 1859. She valued it at $75,000 and used the moment to explain why certain editions matter more than others, why the first printing carries a weight that later printings can never replicate. There was the Confederate bond that turned out to be connected to the wreck of the USS Republic, a ship that sank in a hurricane in 1865 carrying assets tied to the collapsed Confederacy. The items were legally complicated, potentially part of recovered stolen property, and Rebecca's careful historical research kept the shop from purchasing something that could have become a serious legal liability. There was the episode involving a Shakespeare first folio that appeared impressively aged but failed on closer inspection. The paper didn't show the right patterns of deterioration. The ink was too consistent. Tiny imperfections that always accumulate in 4 centuries of handling were simply absent. She identified it as a likely fake, saving the shop from what could have been one of its most expensive mistakes. And there was a Frankenstein first edition in 2013, Mary Shelley's original 1818 publication, which she valued at $20,000 and which generated an online response that surprised even the show's producers. People who had watched Pawn Stars casually for years suddenly began researching the history of the book themselves. Rebecca had that effect. She didn't just answer questions. She made people curious enough to start asking their own. Perhaps the most quietly remarkable of all her appraisals was one that touched on a dimension of history that most television programs actively avoid. When someone brought in 19th-century documents related to the slave trade, Rebecca did not sidestep the weight of what she was handling. She explained how to approach the valuation of objects whose significance is not purely financial, objects that carry moral and historical meaning that cannot be separated from any dollar figure attached to them. That kind of intellectual honesty, the refusal to reduce everything to a transaction, is not something that gets manufactured for a camera. In 2014, an episode aired that would cast a long shadow over Rebecca's final months on the show. A seller brought in what he claimed was a rare 1841 edition of the Book of Mormon. Rebecca examined it and estimated its value at $40,000. After negotiation, Rick Harrison purchased it for $24,000. It seemed, on the surface, like a solid acquisition. Then the whispers started. Rumors spread across online forums and social media platforms suggesting that the book had been stolen from the Marriott Library at the University of Utah. According to these accounts, federal agents became involved. Questions were raised about how a stolen historical item had made it onto national television without anyone raising an alarm. Rebecca Romney, the show's rare book expert, was reportedly questioned by investigators who wanted to understand how such a gap in verification had occurred. No charges were ever filed publicly. No official statement was ever issued by the History Channel or by any party directly involved. But the story circulated with enough persistence to shape how many viewers interpreted what happened next. On January 10, 2015, Rebecca Romney appeared on Pawn Stars for the last time. The episode involved a pirate book from 1734 that she valued at $1,000. Rick, as always, negotiated a lower purchase price. And then she was gone. No announcement. No farewell segment. No statement from the network explaining her absence. After 4 years and nearly 24 appearances, she simply stopped appearing. The History Channel offered nothing. Rebecca offered nothing publicly either. The silence was complete and, to many fans, deeply unsettling. What made the situation more puzzling was what Rebecca did not do. She did not remove Pawn Stars from her professional LinkedIn profile. 4 years after her last appearance, she continued listing herself as the show's rare book expert, a detail that seemed inconsistent with someone who had left under hostile circumstances, yet also seemed odd for someone who had simply moved on to other things. Some observers interpreted it as evidence of a non-disclosure agreement. Others thought it was simply a reflection of professional identity, that the work she had done on the show remained genuinely representative of her expertise, regardless of the circumstances surrounding her departure. The truth, as far as it can be reconstructed from publicly available information, appears to be less dramatic than the rumors suggested, but still more complicated than a simple career change. Rebecca's departure from regular Pawn Stars appearances coincided with significant professional developments that had nothing to do with scandal. She was moving toward a more substantial role in her professional life, one that the constraints of a television schedule in the format of a pawn shop reality show could not accommodate. But the time